Let's go to this Greg Gutfeld thing. We have like sort of two things to compare and contrast today. Well, we'll get to that Trump thing, his quote about immigrants poisoning the blood of America. But here is Greg Gutfeld, who just the other day was trying to argue, like, do we care about any of this leadership fight? It means nothing. Listen to what he's going to do here in terms of, like, where we're at. This is now, national television, one of the highest rated shows on Fox.
But only certain people get criminal mulligans. And January 6 protesters, they don't get criminal mulligans. And here's why. They're the oppressor, right? So the oppressed get criminal mulligans. The people that are complaining, like us, we're actually oppressors, and we're losing power. So that's why we're upset. I just got a job at it.
I think this becomes apparent, but just to decode it, oppressors means white people here, as he's using, and oppressed means black people.
Yes, us. Right, exactly.
MSNBC. But let's compare the rights between criminals and victims. Okay, the criminals, they get a mulligan. They get to steal up to $900 worth of stuff. They can loiter, sleep, and shoot up in public areas, including playgrounds. They can loot and burn and call it social justice. They can pile up dozens of arrests and never do time. Meanwhile, what about us? Well, we have to change our lives to accommodate risk wherever we go. We have to move out of cities for the sake of the safety of our families and our own safety. That's what's happening. We're being driven out of cities by the oppressed. So I return to my imperfect analogy from yesterday. We had a war over slavery. We knew slavery was inhumane and immoral, but somehow we couldn't solve slavery peacefully. It was an evil, but one side refused to acknowledge that it was evil because it was too big of an admission for them to make. Doesn't that feel that way now? That this
Pause it for 1 second. We should just be clear, incidentally. That side that he's talking about, you notice he stopped saying we. And whatever the we is that he was using in the first analogy, he is part of that we.
Yes.
In the second one that refused to see slavery as a problem. If you want to look at the slave states and you want to match up, you take like one of those overhead projectors back when I was in elementary school with the AV shit, and you put the plastic sheet down over the country, the map of the USA, and you color in the slave states. And then you take another slide and you color in the consistently Republican red states. It's not a one-to-one, but it's about as close as you can get.
Yep.
So when he says we in the first one, we are the oppressors and they get to do all this criminal stuff. He should use we also didn't accept that slavery was wrong.
It's such a crazy analogy too, because like the being denied here is what, crime, like as if like we denied slavery the same way. Like, no, we put billions of dollars towards like or not billions of dollars, like lots of money back then towards capturing escaped slaves and stuff like that. Like, and we incarcerate people more than any other country in the world now. Like, we're not denying that this exists.
Families and our own safety. That's what's happening. We're being driven out of cities by the oppressed. So I return to my imperfect analogy from yesterday. We had a war over slavery. We knew slavery was inhumane and immoral, but somehow we couldn't solve slavery peacefully. It was an evil, but one side refused to acknowledge that it was evil because it was too big of an admission for them to make. Doesn't that feel that way now? That this defiant refusal to reverse this decline argues against the survival of a country. What does that leave you with? It leaves you with you need to make war to bring peace, because you have a side that cannot change, because then that means an admission that their beliefs have been corrupt all the time. So in a way, you have to force them to surrender.
Or we could make love, not war.
I tried that once.
Or we have an election.
I had to go to a doctor.
Right. Election, yeah.
No, elections don't work. We know that. We know they don't work.
They do work.
Look what we have. Look what we have.
but just
We had a moderate president, and we have crime exploding everywhere. We had a Democrat president promise that he was going to be moderate, promise that he was going to unite the country, and now we have a terrible education system. We have no border. We have crime everywhere. Every facet of society is in peril and in chaos because our elections don't matter.
No, elections do matter. We don't need to go to war for it. We go to the election booth and vote the people out who don't do the things.
Yeah.
Waste of a space he is.
Comedian
Ford, he was horrible.
Comedian Greg Gutfeld over there essentially saying that democracy is a bit inconvenient and calling for civil war. That's what he's calling for there?
Well, also, I mean, understand, this is like this was Nixon's playbook, really, in many respects. The same thing. This chaos exists. I mean, it was Trump's dark vision this is the idea. Crime is maybe half of what it was 30 years ago in this country.
Yep.
We went through a once in a century event. Crime went up. Now it's going back down. Inflation went up. Now it's going back down. The only thing is with inflation, the things are a little sticky. Like the prices are still up. But as the rate of crime drops, the number actually also, like it doesn't stick around. When we're year over year less crime, we have less crime.
Yeah.
We're year over year rate of inflation, still some things remain expensive. But this is the vision that they're trying to paint, and they're also he's stoking.
It's authoritarianism.
Yeah,
That is, yeah. I mean, how funny. So funny, Greg Gutfeld there. What else can you say? I mean, then that is, when he says you need war to make peace, it's overused, but that's downright Orwellian.
Well, one side needs to be defeated, he says.
I mean, I agree with that, but I mean, also people are moving from cities because of crime. It's because of the cost of living and they're retiring.
100%.
Exactly.
Yes.
We have we should say that
I wish people were moving out of the
housing right now is more expensive per income than it's ever been by like 25%. Huge jump in the expense of housing. In many respects, we're just still suffering from the lack of building from 2008.
Yeah.
And the cost of everything because of this jump in the mortgage rates has, I mean, just in the past couple of months, people buying. I just saw one thing. I think it was from Unusual Whales. Is that it?
The stock trading account.
I think I may even have it right here. Here it is. Housing affordability is the worst on record. It would take some combination of up to a 28% decline in home prices, plus more than a 4% reduction in 30-year mortgage rates, or up to a 60% growth in the median household incomes to bring home affordability back to its 25-year average. The average American buyer faces one of the most unaffordable housing markets where first-time buyers would need to earn as much as $90,000 in 2022. The housing prices are at a 4-decade high unaffordable level. And rents probably mirror this. I don't know if it's a one-to-one relationship. But the problem we have now, too, is that it's much more expensive to borrow the money to buy a home.
Yep.
And on top of that, that's being exacerbated because we jumped rates so quickly that a huge portion of homeowners are locked in at this 3% rate, more or less. And so if they sell the housing, their monthly costs are going to cost double.
Exactly.
So there's no inventory. Home sales are 40% under where they usually are in terms of inventory. And that is because people are actually locked into where they are because they can't afford to buy something else and move because of that delta.
It really is pretty scary, that rant, that's allowed on television. Notice how they will still engage in all of the anti-electoral, anti-democracy stuff when it doesn't implicate Dominion, when it doesn't implicate Smartmatic. The only lesson that they learned from that Dominion lawsuit was just don't implicate a corporate entity or an individual as it pertains to Ray Epps. Like, when the Republican Party tries to brand themselves as small government, or conservatives do, just know that that's their branding, because what they really are is the anti-pluralist party, the anti-democracy party, the party of systemic racism and structural inequality. And that's Gutfeld just admitting it right there. Elections, the voice of the people, that's too dangerous. Look at what it leads to. Look at this scary footage. I mean, that's the guy that freaks me out. That's the thing that's really scary. That's the real threat. He's
entirely like that. That's so hysterical. That's what you'd expect from a Fox News viewer. And that's a guy, and he literally believes this stuff about open borders.
Yep.
And, we just allow crime to go on.
And he'll probably get a promotion for that.
I want to talk just briefly about the crime thing, because I know we're trying to get somebody on from Popular Info. I don't know if it's going to be Judd Leckham or some of his co-writers over there at Popular Info. But on the day after Target announced they were closing 9 stores because they supposedly lost something like $1.6 billion in shoplifting, the next day, the National Association of Retail organizations came out and said, we're not seeing any numbers, any big bump. And I think we were just sort of speculating that this is people in the C-suite protecting decisions that they made and excusing their own sort of mismanagement of stores and predictions, particularly going into COVID, as to where, places would gentrify and where they wouldn't. And Popular Info did a great piece on this, because everybody hears this. And I know I've had conversation with 2 different people who are not big news consumers, but we're aware of this. And we're like, eesh. I'm like, I don't think that's right. Because there is just even the East Harlem one didn't make sense.
Yep.
So an analysis by Popular Information found that one of the stores that Target is closing in East Harlem found that the area surrounding the plaza at 517 East 117th Street has had fewer incidents of shoplifting reported this year than other Target locations in Upper Manhattan. This is all New York Police Department complaint data. So in other words, if this Target was being closed because it's due to rampant crime, you would see that in the police data. This analysis includes incidents of petty larceny from a store, grand larceny from a store, and robberies that began as shoplifting. Comparatively, the 1-block area around the Target located at 150 86th Street had 327 incidents reporting of shoplifting in the same period versus the 201 at the one that they're closing. Meanwhile, Target plans to open another location about a mile away from the location it's going to close on the East River, which seems really odd if it was an issue of crime. They just guessed wrong at where the gentrification would happen.
It's corporate PR. It's corporate PR, then that is breathlessly reported by the press.
Totally. And there's no data.
Yeah.
There's no numbers. Popular Info. And they went through a couple places where they could find data in the Seattle.
This is also just like the power of some of these trade associations, and they write about this in the piece, the National Retail Federation. The fact that they have been allowed to frame the conversation around crime in this country, I would say, I think that they have more power than people realize, particularly in cities, and as do restaurant associations and hotel chains and places like that want to make it about the undesirables as opposed to, so they can make as much money as humanly possible, as opposed to the effect that their presence and boxing out certain kind, like affordable housing and making things unlivable for people, the effect that's having on the communities. They don't want that to be the conversation.
Yeah, this is also going on in D.C. Some D.C. journalists are posting pictures or videos of the store in Columbia Heights, a CVS, being ransacked apparently. And one you hear from people that live in DC and it's like, yeah, actually that one's mismanaged. There's another CVS nearby that's fine. But you look at actually CVS, last year they announced a plan for $10 billion of stock buybacks. So if you're worried about crime, maybe you should reinvest some of that into security. I don't know. And then this Ohio Capital Journal article on CVS spoke to employees that asked to remain anonymous, but they went on record to say that short staffing at CVS is not always due to lack of qualified people, but that it's a conscious policy imposed because managers are getting bonuses. Yeah. So it's like, yeah, well, let's have all this stuff stocked absolutely, like, and not have any sort of security invested into this sort of thing, and then just let people ransack it. And then when we don't protect like the things that we're supposedly selling, we just ask for more cops and say, don't look at us.
Cost saving for them too, because then they don't have to, as you say, they don't have to pay for security.
If you need cops, if you need Uncle Sam to protect your deodorant and pharmacy and the razor blades, then Uncle Sam should just sell those stuff themselves.
And again, the root of people stealing deodorant, baby food, formula, diapers,
or even expensive stuff to resell,
is not some pathology. I'm going to get mad. It is the fact that people are desperate. Okay? So that should be obvious to people, but instead we have fear-mongering about black people on one of the biggest news channels in the country.
And this is the other thing I think that people don't sort of like, casual observers of this don't contemplate. Every time now there is a violent crime committed, not every time, but the number of violent crimes now that are available on video,
yep,
relative to what it was 20 years ago is, I mean, I can't even, I don't even know how to quantify it.
Yeah.
Like, like the stories of, and certainly like, I've been living in New York for 30 years, almost 29 years. But been coming down to New York, as an adult for longer than that. And there's always stories of somebody coming out of a bar getting kicked in the head and dying, or getting stabbed. I mean, obviously it's horrible. It is, I mean, they exist outside of cities too, but one thing that is clear is that you're far more likely to be caught on video in a city now than you would be in a rural situation. So we get a unbalanced view, literally view, of where a violent crime takes place. Mm-hmm. And then we also just don't have the ability to process how much crime exists relative to our ability to see it. This stuff happened 20 years ago, but it would just get reported in the paper and there was no video, and so nobody would talk about it and spread it around. I mean, it
didn't just happen 20 years ago. It happened way more 20 years ago. It happened way more 30 years ago. It happened way more 40 years ago. Crime's been on a steep decline for decades at this point.
I mean, I'm just going to read. This is from visualcapitalist.com. I don't know that website, but just a closer look at the violent crime rate per 1,000 residents list. Bessemer, Alabama, #1. Monroe, Louisiana. Saginaw, Michigan. Memphis, Tennessee. Detroit, Michigan. Birmingham, Alabama. Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Little Rock, Arkansas. Alexandria, Louisiana. So when all these like sort of red state, like DeSantis, Jacksonville, a lot of crime there. When they go do these publicity stunts in these blue cities, you know that they don't care about any of those victims in those places.
And also in those places, lowest minimum wage in the country.